I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me about DC3 and all of the exciting updates. Can you take a few minutes and introduce yourself and the agency where it falls within DoD and how it relates to the defense industrial base?
I have been the deputy director in DC3 in a directorate we call the DICE. I served as an interim director over the summer while Ms. Covey departed, and we brought in our new DICE director, a gentleman named James Hadley. And I think once he gets his feet under him with all things DICE, then it'll be a great time. Probably the time he's ready, it'll be a great time to catch up with that. So who are we? We are DC3. We're the DoD Cyber Crimes Center. We are organizationally aligned under the Air Force. I'm technically an Air Force civilian, but our mission spans the entire Department of Defense. And so within DC3, we serve a number of roles in supporting investigative agencies, law enforcement and counterintelligence, especially in fields of cyber training, in forensic training, in digital and multimedia forensics. We have a highly regarded forensics lab supporting multiple investigative agencies. We have a cyber training academy that provides training to a number of our government forces, including cyber national mission forces. My group, DICE, engages with the defense industrial base on behalf of the CIO's DIB Cybersecurity Program. That program is 14 and a half years up and running, and we just welcomed our 1,000th partner company into the program. We also have a vulnerability disclosure program. The DoD Vulnerability Disclosure Program is located here at DC3. And I think that covers the major sort of public-facing lines of effort. So we have an interesting tie-in because, again, we're situated in the Air Force. The DIB-focused program is coming up from policy and DoD CIO. And because of our multi-agency mission, and we have connective ties to all of the services, all of the cyber investigative counterintelligence organizations, and as I said, over 1,000 companies in the defense industrial base.
Yeah, let me ask you a question first about the DIB-CS program. So from what I remember, it's only open to contractors with clearances or cleared contractors. Is that still the case?
So it is open to companies with facility clearances. Right? Okay. So they've been through the NISPOM and they've been approved by DCSA, and they have a facility clearance where they can store and process classified information. Individuals within the program don't necessarily need to be cleared because most of the information that we deal with is at the unclassified level. It'll be for official use only or controlled unclassified information because it needs to be actionable. Right. So I think it's been recognized across the community that we need to find a way to open this program up to companies that don't have facility clearances.
Right.
The majority of the actual defense industrial base.
And I would imagine companies with facility clearances have a pretty good governance program. They've passed some sort of, assessment process with DoD. So it would make sense that the companies that don't have that probably need a little bit more help. So recognizing that these companies need help, what kind of tools does DC3 have available for companies in the DIB-CS program?
So here's what I can tell you about the non-cleared companies is There's definitely work underway to open the program to non-cleared companies. I can't give you a timeline on that. It is governed by the federal rulemaking process, but it is something we are actively engaged in getting through all of the wickets it has to go through. For defense industrial-based companies who join the program, first of all, we are founded on a crowdsourced cyber threat information sharing premise. The origins of this program go back to 2008 and the very first stages of figuring out how to share classified and unclassified cyber threat information between the government and the industrial base. And so how does that happen? It happens through web portals. It happens through publicized information, printed information. It happens in person. We engage companies one-on-one, analyst to analyst. It happens through larger events. And we've had 2 technical exchanges every year since the program began. In fact, we just had our first in-person TechX in September, the first in-person one since the pandemic started. And so all of these are ways of getting information, first of all, from the government to industry, secondly, from industry to the rest of industry. So one of the cornerstones of threat sharing for us is that when information comes in from a company in the DIB, we anonymize it and share it back out with the other 999 companies for their awareness and their defense. And what we've learned over time is that about 80% of the information that we share is completely unique. You're not going to get it from a commercial source, for example. So I like to tell people, you literally can't pay for this. The program is free to join if you're a cleared defense contractor. And again, that's 80% of the information we share is utterly unique, not available elsewhere.
So I'm not sure how many companies are out there that are cleared defense contractors, but there's probably a whole lot more that are in the DIB. Why would companies not want to join the DIB CS program? Is it a cumbersome process? Is it burdensome on the company to become part of it and stay in it? Like, why aren't companies doing this more, or how can we help get the message out so that more companies do want to participate?
Well, I think your last point is really the key. It's about getting the message out. And to kind of share with you some observations. So again, the program begins in 2008. I came on board in 2017. There were about 230-ish companies. So in the first 9 years, it had grown from 16 to somewhere in the 200s. And then in the last 5 years, now we're up to over 1,000. I'm not taking all the credit for that. It's not like I walked in the door and everything got better. But the increased awareness and the running time allowed us to build trust. So one of the advantages we have in this space is a long track record of trusted relationships with the defense industrial base. And there are companies that will share things with us that they're not necessarily comfortable sharing in other forums. And that has helped kind of build, if you like, the reputation of the program and the reputation of the organization. And so while, there's way more than 1,000 companies out there in the defense industrial base, I think a rough estimate of cleared companies is 12,500. And a rough estimate of total DIB companies, let's say, is 250,000. All right. Why are there 1,000 companies here? That's how the program has grown, if you like, organically. And because it is voluntary to join, it requires some convincing to get folks kind of on board and in the door. And that's not a bad thing, because again, if a company joins, it means that they've recognized there's some value in being here and value in participating. So I think it's a question of awareness. It's a question of showing folks, it is not hard to join the program. Effectively, the company needs a medium assurance certificate. It's a soft cert, which is required within your contract most likely anyway. And you sign up through the DoD CIO. We here in DC3 will take you through an onboarding process, and you have access to our entire repository of threat reports, our daily updated list of active indicators, and a number of defensive cybersecurity services that we offer.
Yes. Can we dive into some of these cybersecurity services that you offer to companies? Because threat is great, or threat reports and intel is fantastic, but these small companies sometimes can't pay for these types of cybersecurity services. So what do you offer to these companies that are part of the DIB CS program?
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that's changed when I talk about the growth of the program is we hit a tipping point a few years ago where, we started with kind of the major primes and a couple of other large research organizations. But as the program grew, what you saw is that more and more of the companies in the program were 250 people or less. Mm-hmm. And we're at the point now, I think about 2/3 of that overall partnership is small, medium-sized businesses. All right, so if you're a small business where your cybersecurity person is also, your business capture person, who is also writing contracts for your facility support, if you even have an office. How do you deal with cyber threat reporting? Well, you probably don't. So what we have been doing for the last couple of years is kind of experiments, running pilots to see if we were to provide a service free of charge, through a vendor, would it be of use to the company? Would it be of use to the Department of Defense? We want to be able to have victories on both sides. And a very early form of that was protective DNS. We worked with NSA to run the PDNS pilot, which we all agreed was a success, and NSA has taken that and offers that out to pretty much every defense industrial base company out there. Let me say, if you're in the DIB and you have not checked out PDNS from NSA, you really ought to. It's a wonderful service, it's easy to set up, and it's great at getting, let's say, low-hanging fruit, easy defensive stuff. Within DC3, one of the things we offer, we call it Dice Cubed. Effectively, what companies are doing is sending us firewall logs to a trusted, secure repository for analysis. So what happens is we get the firewall logs on a pretty much continual basis. The data in those logs is compared with, let's say, 50 or 60 commercial threat feeds, as well as the USG-derived data that we in DC3 have access to. We rate threats. And so first of all, every company participating has a dashboard. They can look at what their traffic is like. Secondly, they have an option to auto block things that are, let's say, it's scored on a range of 1 to 9. So you could say, well, I want to auto block everything that's an 8 or higher. We can do that for you. And it's really, for the first time, given us greater insight to what's going on in the DIB in general from a cybersecurity perspective. At the same time, it's not intrusive. We're not putting a sensor on your network. We're not coming in past the firewall, and we're not claiming to. We are looking at what's kind of on your external perimeter. And we have been very, very successful in identifying some pretty critical threats. We've seen traffic going out that shouldn't be going anywhere. We've seen, some of the major vulnerabilities going back to things like SolarWinds and FortiGate vulnerabilities and things like that have revealed themselves through the Dice Cube service. So that's one of them. Another one we call Crystal Ball. There may or may not be a connection between our former director's name.
I was wondering about that. I didn't ask her directly, but it seemed coincidental.
I think Ms. Covey did not imagine that when we signed off on the name that one day she would have to stand there in public and say, hey, here's Crystal Ball. So I'm glad they didn't name it after me. Crystal Ball begins with basic open source scanning. I'm sure you're familiar with Shodan, and a lot of the folks seeing this will be familiar. So it's that kind of technology, but what we've done is add numerous pieces to our analysis suite, basically. So we're not just looking for kind of, standard vulnerabilities. We're looking for domain typo squatting. We are looking for, traffic traversing the public internet to known bad IPs. And once again, what this has done for us is give us much greater insight into traffic around the DIB. And it's really enabled us to help individual companies identify potential problems. When I go back to what I said about sharing indicators with 1,000 companies, that's the model we begin with, right? We say a rising tide lifts all boats. So we want to share this information out so that the DIB as a whole can bolster their cyber defenses. The flip side is these services, Dice Cubed and Crystal Ball, enable us to warn specific companies. Hey, you may have a potential incident. You may have a potential vulnerability. We've helped them find rogue IT. There's a server they didn't even know was sitting out there that was vulnerable.
So if a company is really small and they don't have the personnel to remediate, if you come to them and you're like, hey, here's this potential issue or vulnerability, and they say, okay, what do you want me to do about it? Are you able to help them or provide some sort of support to help them fix it?
What we'll do at this point is provide recommendations. So A company in that situation is likely going to be working with a managed service provider or maybe more than one MSP, depending on the situation. And what we're more than happy to do is like kind of give you a rundown of what you need to tell your MSP, or if we get on the phone with you and your MSP, because again, the MSP is not the contractor, so we're not going to call them directly, but we're more than happy to help with that conversation to make clear what we're seeing. And by the way, this is only what we're seeing on the outside. So in many cases, a company will come back and say, yeah, it's actually not what you thought it was. It's this, and it's okay, and we've checked it out, and thank you for the heads up, But that's our next step, is we provide mitigation recommendations for a company.
Do you DC3 keep any sort of metrics or data since the beginning to show how these efforts have reduced maybe the threats or incidents? Is there any data on that yet, or is the jury still kind of out on how this rising tide is helping everybody?
To look across the DIB, it is somewhat difficult to assess, the state of cybersecurity across all of these things. So a couple of statistics I can hand over to you for now. First of all, I'll tell you that as of October, we had about 180 firewalls from across the DIB reporting into our DICE-Cube service. Some of those are just one, device per company. Some of those is one company with multiple devices. But that's an area where in the last, I would say, a year, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth. So as we're able to talk to the DIB about what we do and how we help to defend, we get more and more signups for this thing. I can tell you that about 28% of the threats that come through are being auto-blocked.
That's great.
So, without going down to the eaches, that's at least it's well over a quarter just auto blocking. People have just said, yeah, this is good. We're just going to go with that. And the remaining threats, depending on how high risk they are, people do want to evaluate it on their own. We pride ourselves in standard repeatable processes, which sounds awfully boring and governmenty, but it is how we were able to sustain our quality of service during the pandemic. And it enables us to ensure, you're not going to get google.com on a list of indicators from us, for example. Some of the key vulnerabilities that we've identified and been able to warn companies about are, some CVEs related to proxy no-shell, some SQL injection indicators. We've identified some secure SSH vulnerability data transfer errors, indicators. There's an APT kind of out in the public called KillNet. We've seen some activity from them. I want to make it clear these are not necessarily all successful intrusions. These are attempts that we detect and are able to warn companies about. Cobalt Strike, very popular tool for both white hat and black hat researchers. Well, we found a company where there was Cobalt Strike beaking out of a location. And, hey, did you have a red team on site? Or is maybe somebody doing something with your network that they shouldn't be? So those are the kinds of things we're able to identify through our services.
Okay, and quick question. So I feel like a lot of consultants watch these interviews and maybe are worried that they're going to be out of a job if their clients start, joining the DIB-CS or procure some of these NSA services. Are the services that you're offering in any way replacing MSPs or acting as a pure substitute for having a cybersecurity professional in your company?
No, this is a quick answer. We are not replacing cybersecurity professionals, and we are not trying to. Taken from sort of the macro level, first of all, there is so much work to go around in DIB cybersecurity. And I think one of the things we've recognized in DoD is that, whether you're talking about DC3 or NSA or DCISE, all of us only have a piece of the DIB. No one's got the DIB holistically. So for every company in our program, there are 10 or 100 that we're either not reaching, can't work with, or just haven't gotten in touch with yet. Secondly, these are individual services that I would say are a component of a holistic cybersecurity program. They are by no means intended to be a holistic program unto themselves. Any company that is working with DoD should absolutely continue to work with their consultants, their cybersecurity staff, their MSPs. And sometimes in DoD we misspeak what our actual mission is when it comes to the DIB. So one of the things I'll pull from our mission statement is that I'll start with the negative. Our job is actually not to secure the DIB. The DoD is not on a mission to secure private industry. We are securing or helping to secure our data, DoD data that resides on DIB networks. That's what we're at. Now, to the extent that that goes to larger sort of DIB cybersecurity, well, that's definitely a trade space and a benefit, I would say, to everybody. But again, we are not out to replace industry. We're not out to take over your cybersecurity. These are services that can help you, and it is voluntary to you if you choose to use them.
That's a solid point.
We're not replacing anybody.
Right. You're not replacing anybody, and it's not meant to be the whole of a company's cybersecurity. What about compliance? DoD is always, or has been at least in the last 5 or 6 years, forefront of cybersecurity compliance regulation for contractors. So I imagine that the DC3 cybersecurity services are in some way mapped or linked or related to some of the compliance requirements for the defense industrial base.
Absolutely. In fact, we are recognizing that a DIB company does have compliance requirements. One of the things we began was something called a cyber resilience assessment, or CRA. And it's modeled on, there's a cyber resilience, I believe, review that DHS has had for years. What we did is we talked to the folks who developed that CRR and fine-tuned it for compliance requirements for the DIB. So our CRA is, if you like, a high-level overview of a company's cybersecurity posture. It's not an in-depth DIB CAC assessment. It's not intended to be a CMMC-specific assessment. But we do map the questions and results to NIST controls and what the CMMC objectives that are known and publicly available. So a company goes through this with us. It takes 6 to 8 hours. We'll facilitate it virtually or in person. And at the end of it, they'll get a readout and a report kind of at a high level. Here's where you are across, let's say, 10 different security domains. And what that does is it gives them at least a place to start, right? Eventually, they're going to have to get a DIB CAC assessment. They're going to have to do CMMC, however that turns out. We're not, again, trying to step into that business. We're trying to get you started so at least you know how far you have to go to even get there. We've run about 34 of these in the last year or 2 years. My favorite stat from that is that the companies that have come back year over year to do a repeat CRA, we've seen a 90% improvement in the domains where they were underperforming.
That's awesome.
They're really able to figure out where are the big problems we need to solve and prioritize those and get after them. So again, starting at having nothing, you have a baseline, and from that baseline, it's very easy to target areas for improvement.
So with that being said, should companies who are not currently part of the DIBCS program and who want to procure some of these services, what if they are worried that they maybe aren't as compliant as they should be, or they're not really sure? Is there any retribution, or can they get in trouble if you guys find that they're not as mature as they think they are or should be? Or during doing any of the cybersecurity services, if any threats are discovered and it comes out that maybe they didn't have something they should have, or this VDP program, can they get in trouble for any of the vulnerabilities or issues that are brought to light from DC3 services?
The quick answer is no. And the reason is everything that we offer is encompassed under this voluntary DIB cybersecurity program. So participation is voluntary. Literally, you sign an agreement, a framework agreement between your company C-suite and now Dave McEwen, the DoD Senior Information Security Officer, right? And I've got copies of all these. I've got their signatures on them. And one of the conditions of that framework agreement is that everything reported to us under that construct is anonymized. So when we get inputs in from industry, it's anonymized almost immediately before it gets shared out to anybody. And written into the framework agreement, it says DC3 DICE will maintain the confidentiality of the membership. So what we've done, for example, you'll notice the vulnerabilities we found, the companies we have, the cyber resilience assessments. Like, I have not told you the names of any of the companies that have undergone these things, and I will not do that, no matter how much you ask me. And we don't share that outside of really DC3. DoD will share statistics, we'll share generalizations. We will talk to the depth that we can about capabilities that we have and what we know about the DIB. But anything provided under this voluntary program remains confidential. So if we did a CRA and you scored a 0, I don't know if that's possible, but let's say you didn't even write your name on the test.
Right.
That stays with you and it stays with us. And that's the end of it. And then we'll say, well, we did assess a DIB company and they got a score of 0, but that'll be the end of the identity. There is no follow-on contract action. And because we're not the compliance folks, right? Let me go back to what I said. We are not the DIB-CAC folks. We're not the CMMC folks. We're not contracting office. Our job is to help you defend the DoD data that you have. And that's really all we want to do. I hate to say we're from the government and we're here to help, but that's pretty much where we're at.
And can you do these? Sorry to interrupt. Can you do these services on the large major primes just as easily as you can on the small to medium-sized companies and everything in between? Like, this is applicable to anybody?
We can. So we focus and talk a lot about small and medium businesses, largely because the primes, 14 years ago, the primes needed a lot of help. In 2022, cybersecurity at a DIB prime company is significantly advanced and significantly mature. And the services are available to them, right? They're partners in the program just like everybody else. But our experience has been that a company at that level tends to want things more tailored to them, more bespoke, if you like. And so they're less dependent on the information we're putting out to the entire DIB. And so if I'm in, DIB Prime Inc., I only really want to hear about threats to DIB Prime Inc.
Okay.
Not that I'm not interested in threats to my peers, but when it comes to reporting and what I want from my cybersecurity staff, I tend to want to know about things that are really unique to my organization and the government programs that I support. Because in most cases, I will have all that other stuff taken care of. That said, we have had some large companies express interest either in services that we offer or really as a link to their subcontractors. And
that's kind of where I was going is, the primes probably all have facility clearances, the large primes, but their vast supply chain, and the supply chains are probably interlinked among most of the large primes, right? They're all kind of sharing the same suppliers. But what if those suppliers don't have facility clearances, right? But they want to make sure that the data is secure. So is there any, not interoperability, but any way for these large primes to help with their supply chain risk management by, helping their suppliers get into the DIB-CS program? Is there any sort of backdoor for suppliers through a prime?
So what we've seen are a couple of primes essentially work with us and work with CIO to sign an amendment to the framework agreement that allows them to share our data with a set of their suppliers. And I think the way that works technically is it's the prime that's doing the matching of our data with the data from their supply chain. So if they work that agreement with their supply chain, then they can kind of be the honest broker between the two sides where we're by policy not able to really get to yet. That's, I'd say, been the number one way I've seen that happen with non-cleared subcontractors.
Okay. Very interesting, because I feel like more primes should ask, their suppliers if they have facility clearances to enroll or be part. is it proper or legal? Like neither of us are lawyers here, at least not yet. But could a crime, and I'm in my law school's library, which is why there's random people walking by. They're like, who is this? But could a large supplier in a contract require their suppliers to enroll in the DIB-CS program if they have a facility clearance? Have you seen or heard of anybody doing that?
I've heard of companies being told to join by their primes. I am not sure whether that's in a contract or just a sort of verbal, hey, we really think you should get into this program. And I'll leave that to a lawyer to determine whether that's allowed or not.
I feel like I would want to do that. I would want to make sure everybody was enrolled. So we've heard a lot of upsides and all of the positive things. What are the downsides, or what are you not telling us here in an attempt to like sell people on it? Because there has to be a downside. What are there any downsides? What are the naysayers saying? Even if they're not true downsides, what are some objections that people might have?
So some folks simply object to sharing data with the government.
They're a contractor. How do they say that?
It's not a DC. Well, sharing data that is pertinent to their private network. Right. Okay. This is what this is. And we don't have a legal basis on which we can just knock down your door, plug machines into your network, and go forward. There are DoD organizations that can do that if you invite them, but we can't force ourselves there. So there are folks that simply don't trust the government, and that's part of the reality that we're operating in. I don't think there's a downside to our program. I do think you get out of it what you put into it. So if you sign up for the program and then you don't report information to us and you don't join a service and you don't read our reporting, then you're not getting the benefit of it. And, I'd question whether it has value for you, frankly, at that point.
Do you have any idea how many participants are non-active, or do you find the majority of them are active?
I think the majority of them are active. And in most cases, if we find someone is truly, truly inactive, it's because our point of contact left and we have to work through some communication channels to get whoever the next person is looped back in. And
how, it seems like it would be a lot of effort to maintain that, your 1,000 members that you have now, and hopefully it grows over time. How do you ensure that they all still have valid facility clearances, all of the network sharing and all, how do you maintain the currency of all of those members?
I hire people to do it. So we have in DICE, we have a branch called Customer Engagement, which is really DIB partner engagement. And we have a team, we do essentially customer relations management. And this team is responsible for kind of once we've got initial contact from the company, we're working with CIO to get framework agreements signed and routed. And we have a system that we're both plugged into. So we see every company through a common workflow. And once they're kind of brought in and signed on, they're handed over to DICE, and we take them through several weeks, not continuous weeks, but we do webinars every so often on the basics of DICE. What are our threat products? How do you use them? How do you submit incident reports? How do you use these services? What can we do for you, right? And we really seek to build a relationship with each company. And it's part of our team's jobs to ensure we have routine and regular contact with every company in the program.
That is amazing. Okay, so can you take us from soup to nuts, how a company who is not in the DIB-CS program, how they become part of the DIB-CS program, all the way through how they get onboarded with DICE and receive these services? So what's the first thing a company that has a facility clearance needs to do to start?
So the first thing they're going to do is contact DoD CIO. I would say go to dibnet.dod.mil.
Okay.
And first of all, that is the website where we store our threat reporting for partners to download. And we kind of manage our major communications through there. There is, by the way, also a free open source cyber threat roundup that we update several times a week for anybody to download. It's strictly open source. There's no USG information in it. Anybody can grab that. And it's just a high level aggregate of what we're seeing out in the world. So you go to dibnet.dod.mil. There's a button to click to join the program. You'll effectively be sending an email to our partners in CIO. They will reach out to you. They'll provide you with a copy of the framework agreement. You'll get it signed. CIO will get it signed. You're in the door. And at that point, we'll establish contact with you and schedule some onboarding calls.
DC3 will proactively reach out to new members?
Yes.
And
yes.
Do you know if the framework agreement has any room for redlining with lawyers, or is it like pretty much a form and you have to sign this agreement? Because I know some companies are risk adverse and may not like some of the language.
So it's typically a standard framework agreement. I cannot sincerely remember the last time we had to go back and forth with lawyering, because it's not an obligation to do much other than you're sworn to protect the identities of the company in the program, and we're sworn to protect your identity as a member of the program. Other than that, it's mechanics about here's how you share information, here's what we agreed to do, as long as this partnership is available, here's what's open to you. So it's not, I would not describe it as a complex legal document, and it's really not binding beyond agreeing to maintain the anonymity of the partnership.
So it should be fairly easy for companies. Like even a 200-person company probably has a hard time signing a contract, right? Like their cyber person probably doesn't have signing authority for the company, so they have to get it routed. So, just trying to understand the burden on a small business trying to get a contract signed. It probably sounds easy, but in practice, it's probably not.
So one of the things I'm happy to offer, and again, not a lawyer, one of the things that helps though is that, I talked earlier about engaging with DIB companies at the analyst level. We are also widely available and more than happy to engage at the leadership level, whether that's someone from, at my level, at the director level, or even if we need to bring our DC3 executive director in. We have and are happy to continue to meet with corporate leadership to talk about the program, talk about what the advantages are, what the requirements are, and what you're signing up for if you agree to the framework agreement.
That's amazing. So you provide the services and you do marketing and you do sales, business development, you do all of it. How much time, like if, I'm the contracting officer and I'm the cyber person, how much time out of my life and day does it take to, submit the application to DoD CIO? Okay, then they reach out. Is there a lot that I would have to stay on top of, or is this a pretty, because you make it seem like a pretty simple process, and is it truly that simple for somebody who wears multiple hats in a small company?
It really is. If you're convinced and you've got leadership buy-in, then whatever it takes for you to route this agreement, and again, we've had 1,000 some companies sign these agreements, so I'm fairly comfortable saying that there's not much in there that's controversial. It's not a contract. Let me be clear about that. It is an agreement of how we're going to share information. Apart from getting that routed and sent back to us, then you're waiting for us to get it routed and signed by our very busy DoD CISO. But every month he's got a stack of them, I think, that he just goes through, and then we're back in touch with you within another month to schedule onboarding. So the wait time might be 2 to 3 months. Okay. But it's not time out of your day. It's not you can go do your job while we're processing stuff.
So when establishing, I guess, quarterly or yearly goals, it should be it could be done in a quarter, right? So it's not something that can be done in an afternoon or a month, even give it a few months to get onboarded. Okay. So yeah, that sounds like a very reasonable time frame for companies. So before we go, is there anything else you want to talk about or make sure that the DIB is aware of with regard to DC3 or any of these services?
A couple of things I'd like to bring up. I mentioned at the start of our talk that we had done our first in-person technical exchange, like I said, in about 3 years. And I wanted to highlight that because one of the things we were able to do that we haven't done in a couple of years is have classified discussions. One of the things we offer to companies is the ability to meet with us and get cyber threat information at the classified level. And so the first day of TechX, we We were in a DIB facility in the DC3 area, the National Capital Region, and we had a number of classified presentations and discussions on cyber threats. The second day, we opened it up. It was an unclassified discussion, and we had our first hybrid event. We had about 60 people in the room and another 100 online. Pre-pandemic, we probably had up to nearly 300 people at a TechX. During the pandemic, and I'm sure people have seen this all over the place, is, the interest in an online conference dwindled quite a bit, including me personally. Like, I don't want to sit through one of those again. But what we were able to do is get, 100 to 200 people, 181 total for both days. And we had, again, these are not just briefs. These are back and forth collaborative discussions. One of the things we offer that I didn't touch on is if you're a DIB partner, you can submit malware samples to our lab, which we will analyze and report back to you for free. We've literally done, Leslie, hundreds of thousands of hours of free malware analysis for the defense industrial base. We had a significant discussion with feedback from partners on where they'd like to see us go with that malware analysis portal. And we are happy to be responsive to that because it's developed for the betterment of the DIB partnership. The other thing I want to highlight, the first time we've done this, we've instituted a new type of event called DICE FIRE. FIRE is Facilitated Incident Response Exercise. You know us, we're the government. We have to have an acronym.
Right. And we're the DoD, so we have tons of acronyms, like even more than
nested within acronyms. Yes, yeah. Right. So with that, what I want to say about DICE FIRE is that it was a live incident response kind of team competition. And what we did is we worked closely with a major training vendor through a partnership we have with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and the Defense Criminal Investigation Community. They set up a training environment. We had folks in person, we had folks online, and we facilitated a series of DIB-focused incident response exercises throughout the day. It was a lot of fun. It was great after 2 days of, talking about cybersecurity, getting hands on keyboards to do cybersecurity. We had no idea. I figured it would be pretty well received. We really didn't know. So we bought 100 seats. They all filled up well before the event actually happened. We got great feedback. So we're looking forward to doing a couple of these a year. And it's really a wonderful opportunity for the DIB to share lessons learned with each other, for us to talk to them about incident response and cybersecurity practices, to see kind of in near real time how they respond, where the gaps are, where we might be able to provide assistance in the future. So our partners can look forward to the next DICE FIRE announcement.
Are you going to publish anything post-event to like share lessons learned or say like, here's what our observations were this year and here's what our recommendations are, for closing those gaps? Because I think that would be a really interesting product.
Well, I think within DoD, we do that sort of thing. I think publicly, what I would be happy to point you to are some some publicly released threat reporting that we have on DC3.mil and on our Twitter account, DC3 DCISE.
Is it a verified account? Just kidding. Twitter. No.
We've not gone down that route, no. But the quick answer to what we can share about observations in the DIB in a public space are these quarterly reports we do on DC3.mil and on our Twitter account. So if you look there, you'll see reported tactics from the last quarter. We do talk a lot about ransomware as it is a significant threat to the DIB. We talk about ransomware that's been reported to us. We talk about common phishing themes and common tactics and techniques mapped against the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And then each quarter we identify kind of 4 major incidents or events or actors, kind of what's been in the news for DIB cybersecurity. So for example, in the last quarter, we talked about active exploitation of Zimbra technology. We talked about some remote access Trojans from the Lazarus group. We talked about some VMware backdoors. and a number of Atlassian vulnerabilities that were disclosed in the last quarter.
That sounds like a trove of excellent information. Can you give us that website one more time?
Sure. So the website is www.dc3.mil. And then within the banner, you'll find DIB Cybersecurity. And whatever we have that's publicly available is going to be there. The other site I mentioned was dibnet.dod.mil. That's where every DIB company goes for mandatory cyber incident reporting. That is also where you go to join our program. That's also where you have our open source cyber threat roundup.
All right. That is awesome. Terry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and share all of your knowledge about DC3. I think this is fantastic. And I hope more companies decide to join. So we'll have to come back in a year and see if you have 2,000 companies or 5,000 companies next year.
I'm looking forward to it, Leslie. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for watching Defense TechCast, your deep dive into CMMC, CUI, and all of the cybersecurity hot topics affecting the defense space today. Brought to you by clearancejobs.com and with host Leslie Weinstein, a cyber expert and U.S. Army major. Subscribe to this page to be sure you can catch the next episode.